In the cold silence of deep space, a signal pulsed. It wasn't strong, barely more than a whisper against the endless void, but it was old, so impossibly old that the machine scanning the sector almost dismissed it as background noise. Yet, something about the rhythm, the structure hidden in the static, carried weight. It carried intent. It carried history. And when the signal was traced back to its source, the explorers found themselves staring at a relic that should not have existed. Drifting on the edge of a dead star system was a vessel, massive and scarred, its hull blackened by time itself. Alien historians, soldiers, and scientists gathered in orbit around it, and their first impression was disbelief. The ship was human, and according to their calculations, it had been there for over 100,000 years. The galaxy had long dismissed humans as a late-blooming species, primitive and fragile compared to the empires that had ruled the stars for ages. To discover a human ship older than entire civilizations shook every assumption. Its design was alien in itself, brutal lines of steel, no elegance, no curves, just raw purpose. The markings on its sides were eroded, yet some of the symbols remained, carved in a language few could read but many felt. They were words of defiance, of survival, of war. The explorers knew at once this was not just a derelict vessel. This was a message, one left behind for anyone who dared to open it. Inside the ship, frozen corridors stretched like veins through a dead body. The walls were lined with scars of battle, melted metal where plasma fire had eaten through, jagged punctures where boarding weapons had once struck. Each step the explorers took echoed against the steel bones of the craft, a reminder that they were walking through something older than their empires, older than their wars, older than even their recorded history. The deeper they went, the stronger the signal became, not just in their instruments, but in their very minds. It was as if the ship itself wanted to be heard, to tell its story. One alien commander paused in front of a sealed chamber, its door, reinforced beyond reason. Across its surface, etched by hand, were lines of human script. The words, once translated, chilled them to their core. "We do not die. We endure." That simple statement carried the weight of centuries. It was not the plea of a broken people, but the vow of a species that had faced annihilation and refused to fade. Suddenly, the explorers realized this was not simply a warship. It was a vault of memory, a record of a struggle so vast it spanned thousands of centuries. What they did not know was that this ship had been deliberately left behind. Humanity had once been locked in a conflict with an enemy so ancient and so merciless that even the galactic archives dared not name it. Each battle scar in the corridors was not just damage, it was testimony. Humans had fought not for conquest or glory, but for survival. And in the process, they had become something the galaxy had never truly understood. A species willing to burn through eternity if it meant living free. The explorers activated the chamber. With a groan that seemed to echo across time itself, the door opened. Inside was not a corpse, nor weapons, nor treasure, but light. Projections flickered to life. Images, recordings, fragments of a past locked away in silence. They saw humans standing on worlds now dust, leading fleets against enemies that blotted out stars, refusing surrender even when defeat was certain. They saw sacrifices beyond measure, worlds set aflame to deny the enemy, and voices declaring, again and again, the same words: "We endure." Every alien present felt their blood run cold. This was not just history. This was a warning. For 1,000 centuries, humanity had fought. Not once, not twice, but endlessly, through cycles of war so long that they blurred together. Civilizations that had risen and fallen in the galaxy had never known that in the shadows of forgotten time, humans had carried the flame of resistance. And if this was only one ship, How many more were out there, silent, waiting, filled with stories and truths the galaxy was not ready to hear? The explorers debated whether to share their discovery with their empires. Some feared that awakening such knowledge would shatter the balance of power, that revealing humanity's true legacy would spark panic or worse, a war to find and control whatever secrets remained hidden. Others argued that this knowledge could unite the galaxy, a reminder that even the smallest, weakest race could rise to face the impossible. Yet as the debate raged, the ship itself made the decision for them. Systems dormant for millennia came alive. Power surging through conduits as though the vessel recognized it had an audience once more. Alarms blared, not in warning but in awakening. The ship's engines rumbled with the ghost of ancient thunder, and the voice of a human, raw, fierce, timeless, echoed through the halls. To those who find this, know this truth. We never stopped fighting. We never will. If you face what we faced, stand with us, or burn alone. The explorers stared at one another in silence. In that single moment, they understood that the galaxy they thought they knew was only a fragile layer over something far older, far more dangerous. The discovery of this one ship was not the end of their search. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And somewhere, deep in the void, other ancient, human vessels stirred. The 1,000 centuries of war were not buried. They were waiting. The explorers didn't know whether to rejoice or fear. They only knew one thing. The galaxy would never be the same again. The signal that had begun as a whisper was now a storm. And humanity's shadow was stretching across the stars once more, carrying with it a promise that chilled even the bravest hearts. The truth was clear. Humanity had been here before. Humanity had fought before. And humanity would rise again. But as the ship's power grew, as long-forgotten coordinates flashed across alien screens, the explorers realized too late something else had heard the signal too. Something that remembered humanity not as survivors, but as enemies, and it was already moving. The explorers remained frozen as the ship's engines hummed faintly, a vibration running through the deck plates like the stirring of a sleeping beast. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, disturbed by currents of air that had not moved in thousands of centuries. The projections still glowed, showing fragments of humans in battle, their faces hard and determined, their voices carrying words none of the alien scholars could fully translate. But the tone needed no translation. It was defiance, unbroken across endless years. One of the younger scientists, her tendrils quivering with both fear and excitement, pointed to the streams of symbols flooding across her display. The coordinates burned bright in the language of numbers, pointing to systems long abandoned, sectors marked as dead zones in galactic charts. Yet here they were, mapped with a precision suggesting not just knowledge, but purpose. The ship wasn't simply a relic. It was a guide, a marker in a chain stretching through forgotten corners of space. Each point likely hid another story, another fragment of humanity's war. The realization struck them hard. This was only the beginning, but beneath the awe was something heavier. The alien commander, who had served decades in frontier campaigns, knew the signs of military design. This wasn't a beacon left behind to inspire. It was a warning relay, and perhaps even a trap. The ancient humans had not been careless. They had known that others would come. If the ship was speaking again, then something had triggered it. And if something had triggered it, then somewhere, somehow, humanity's enemies might have been awakened as well. The explorers tried to piece together what kind of war could have lasted so long. Their empires recorded conflicts spanning centuries, perhaps millennia, but 100,000 years was nearly inconceivable. Civilizations that had risen to dominate the stars had already turned to dust in that time. Yet humanity, a species supposedly young and fragile, had been waging a war across eras, fighting battles that even the galaxy's greatest powers had never endured. The paradox gnawed at them. Had humanity existed longer than their current record suggested? Or had they risen and fallen again and again, each cycle leaving behind a legacy of defiance? The images projected gave hints, but no answers. One moment showed fleets of human ships advancing, crude but numerous, facing off against shadows in the void. Another showed human soldiers marching across scorched ground, rifles in hand, their expressions unyielding as creatures of shifting, monstrous shapes loomed in the distance. The recordings flickered too quickly, as if only fragments had survived the erosion of time. But each glimpse left the aliens with the same impression. Humanity had fought something the galaxy no longer remembered, and survived. Around the derelict, more ships began to arrive. Word of the discovery spread faster than the explorers could contain it. Rival empires dispatched their own vessels, some eager for knowledge, others hunting for technology or secrets of war. Tension brewed in orbit as fleets stared each other down, weapons armed but not yet fired. The ancient human ship had become the most dangerous prize in the galaxy. No empire could afford to let another claim it. But none could deny that its presence demanded unity, or at least caution. The vessel itself seemed to sense the gathering storm, its systems awakening further, lights running down its corridors like veins filling with fire. Inside, the explorers uncovered more writing, etched into bulkheads and walls as though the crew had used their final hours to leave behind their truth. Phrases repeated over and over. "Hold the line! No surrender! Remember the cost!" In one chamber, they found a mural painted by hand, faded but still powerful. It showed a burning sky, alien war machines looming over cities, and in the center stood a human figure raising a weapon, a silhouette unbowed despite the flames. The explorers could not look away. They felt as though the figure was staring directly at them, daring them to judge, daring them to understand. Yet not all were moved by reverence. Some of the new arrivals whispered of weapon caches, of ancient, human technology that could give their fleets an advantage. Others suspected that the ship itself contained a hidden arsenal, perhaps even remnants of whatever force humanity had unleashed to resist their enemy. Arguments broke out in the council ships, some demanding immediate dismantling of the relic, others insisting it be preserved untouched. But no one noticed that the ship was listening. Sensors buried deep in its hull recorded every transmission, every word of greed, every hint of fear. The vessel was not dead. It was watching, weighing those who had come. Meanwhile, beyond the system's edge, movement stirred. Far older than any empire, far more patient, a presence answered the signal. It had lain dormant in the void, waiting, for the frequency it remembered, the one sound it could never forget. The call of humanity. The enemy that had once tried to erase humans from existence had not been destroyed, only sleeping, scattered and waiting. And now, after 1,000 centuries, it was awake again. On the derelict, the explorers uncovered one final chamber. Unlike the others, it had not decayed. Its walls were pristine, the air untouched by time. In the center stood a chair of cold metal, and on it, the remains of a human. The body had withered into dust, but its armor remained intact. A black suit, marked with scars of battle. In its skeletal hand, a device still glowed faintly, powered by energy cells that had lasted across ages. When touched, the device triggered a voice recording, cracked, distorted, but unmistakably human. "To those who find us," the voice said, slow and deliberate, "we fought them, and we bought you time. Time enough to build, to rise, to live free. But know this, they never truly die. When this ship stirs again, so will they. And when they come, you must choose. Stand as we did, or fall." The recording ended, leaving the chamber in silence. The explorers looked at one another. their features pale with dread. Whatever war humanity had waged was not over. It was only delayed, and now they were caught in the middle of something far larger than themselves. Outside, the derelict's engines flared once more, not fully alive, but enough to send ripples across the void. The rival fleets, suddenly aware of the danger, turned their weapons on each other in panic, some desperate to flee, others desperate to seize control. But above the chaos, the ship's systems broadcast the coordinates again, louder and clearer, as if insisting the path must be followed. None of the explorers could shake the final words of the recording. Humanity had not left behind a victory. They had left behind a choice. And the galaxy, whether ready or not, was about to face it. Far from the dead system, in the black between stars, a shadow stretched. Something vast and ancient was coming. And in the silence of their hearts, the explorers realized the truth that terrified them most. Humanity had known this would happen. That was why they had left the ship. That was why they had carved those words. We do not die. We endure. And now the galaxy would learn what that truly meant. The ancient human ship had become the heart of a storm. Around it, fleets from rival empires, circled like predators, each unwilling to back down, each unwilling to let such a discovery slip into another's hands. Every transmission between commanders carried hidden threats. Every silence bristled with suspicion. The explorers who had first entered the ship found themselves prisoners of circumstance. They were no longer scholars searching for history. They were hostages to the greed and fear of their own kind. Yet none of them could shake the feeling that the true danger was not the fleets outside, but the ship itself and what it had awakened. Inside the vessel, the halls glowed faintly with power. The murals and inscriptions, once faded, seemed brighter as if the ship itself fed them light. The explorers noticed that the vessel reacted most when they spoke of war or survival, as though those words resonated with it. They began to suspect that the ship wasn't only a memory vault, but a test, measuring those who came against the standards of the crew who had died there. What unsettled them most was the thought that the ship might pass judgment, and if it did, what would happen? Meanwhile, in the orbiting fleets, politics turned poisonous. One empire's admiral argued for immediate control, claiming that humanity's relics could not be trusted in foreign hands. Another threatened open fire if a single piece of technology was removed from the site. Smaller factions whispered of alliances, plotting to turn the chaos to their advantage. Yet while they debated, their sensors began to pick up strange movements at the edge of the system. Fleets dismissed it at first as asteroids or drifting debris, but the patterns grew too regular, too purposeful. Something was coming closer, and it was not theirs. The explorers discovered another chamber, sealed tighter than the rest. With effort, they forced it open, revealing a room filled with devices unlike anything they had seen. Some were broken, others humming faintly, and at the center stood a towering console covered in human script. When activated, the console projected star maps dotted with glowing red marks. Each mark pulsed faintly, like embers refusing to die. The aliens realized what they were seeing: battlefields. Human battles stretching across the galaxy, recorded over unthinkable spans of time. But what chilled them most was that many of the red marks still glowed as active. These weren't just records of past wars. They were warnings of wars that were not yet finished. One of the explorers, a veteran who had fought border conflicts for decades, stared at the map with dread. The active marks lay in regions long thought empty, voids that ships avoided because of strange readings or unexplained disappearances. The galaxy had dismissed those regions as haunted space, cursed zones no sane fleet entered. Now the truth was clear. They weren't empty at all. They were scars of humanity's endless war, wounds still bleeding in the fabric of the stars. And if the red embers were right, those wounds were beginning to open again. The fleets outside didn't know this yet, but they felt the unease growing. Reports began to filter in from scout ships sent to investigate the edges of the system. The scouts vanished one by one, their signals cut mid-transmission. Some returned with their crews trembling, whispering of shadows larger than moons moving in the dark. The admirals dismissed the reports as panic, but even they felt their confidence falter. The ancient enemy humanity had fought, whatever it was, had not been destroyed. It was stirring, drawn by the signal the derelict had unleashed. On the ship, tension among the explorers deepened. Some believed the relics should be destroyed to prevent anyone from awakening what humans had fought. Others argued the knowledge must be preserved, that humanity had left these warnings for a reason. A divide grew between them, small factions forming, each convinced the other was dangerous. The ship, almost sensing this, responded with bursts of power, lights flickering like heartbeat pulses, as if feeding on their division. A subplot unfolded among the younger scientists. They had begun piecing together fragments of the human language from the murals and inscriptions. Slowly, patterns emerged. They discovered that the words carved into the walls were not only vows of defiance, but also instructions. Some described tactics, others strategies of resistance. The humans had not left behind simple messages of pride. They had left behind a manual for survival. The scientists realized with a mix of awe and fear that humanity had expected their war to last so long that future generations, perhaps even alien ones, would need their knowledge to carry it on. Humanity hadn't written history. They had written a playbook. At the same time, in the rival fleets, paranoia reached breaking point. One empire's commander ordered a boarding party to seize the ship, convinced that only direct control could secure its secrets. Another empire intercepted them, sparking a skirmish in the corridors of the derelict. For the first time in millennia, blood was spilled inside the human vessel, and when it happened, the ship responded violently. Systems flared, alarms screamed, and the projections shifted from calm records to scenes of fire and fury. The aliens watched in horror as images of humanity's wars grew sharper, louder, filling the halls with the sound of battle cries. The ship was reminding them what bloodshed meant, and the message was clear. It had not forgotten. As chaos spread, the explorers found themselves caught between their duty to preserve and the looming threat outside. One of them, weary and shaken, whispered what many had already begun to fear. What if the humans had not truly vanished at all? What if they were still out there, hidden, watching to see how others would handle the legacy they left behind? The thought became a shadow among them, raising questions none dared voice. Meanwhile, the presence at the edge of the system drew closer. Ships without light, vast and silent, slipped through the void. Their forms defied reason, twisting shapes that seemed to shift when looked at directly. Sensors struggled to lock onto them, but one truth became undeniable. They were heading straight for the ancient human ship. The explorers had no name for them, but the ship seemed to recognize them. Its systems surged with desperate energy, as though preparing for a fight it had been waiting centuries to continue. In the fleets, panic grew as the unknown vessels approached. Some prepared for battle, others for retreat. But all of them knew that whatever was coming was tied to humanity's war. The admirals tried to contact their governments, but transmissions were jammed, their messages eaten by static that seemed almost alive. The galaxy's rulers would not hear of this in time. The decision would fall on those already there, those trapped between the relic of humanity and the return of its enemy. The explorers stood in the mural chamber once more, staring at the figure painted in defiance against the flames. They felt the weight of the choice pressing on them. The humans had endured 1,000 centuries of war, but they had not ended it. They had only passed the torch forward. Now the question hung heavy in the silence. Would the galaxy stand as they did, or would it collapse under fear and greed before the true enemy even arrived? The derelict pulsed brighter, its heartbeat echoing through every deck, every fleet, every mind that had dared approach it. The signal spread farther into the void, a call no one could ignore. And in that moment, the galaxy understood that the conflict was not only about who would claim the ship or its secrets. The conflict was about survival itself. Humanity's war had returned, and whether they were ready or not, it was no longer just humanity's alone. The silence before the storm was unbearable. Outside the derelict, rival fleets floated with weapons armed, their captains torn between firing on each other and watching the black horizon where shadows now moved. The unknown ships crept closer, silent and immense, their outlines shimmering, as if space itself bent around them. The explorers inside the ancient human vessel felt each second stretch into eternity, the hum of the ship's awakening systems vibrating in their bones. No one spoke of it, but they all sensed the same truth. The enemy that humanity had once fought was returning. The derelict pulsed brighter with every passing moment, its lights no longer flickering faintly, but burning with deliberate rhythm. It was a heartbeat, strong and insistent, as though the ship itself was preparing to live again. Along the corridors, doors that had been sealed for ages creaked open, revealing armories of rusted weapons, training halls scarred with ancient drills, and banners bearing human symbols that still held power after 1,000 centuries. The explorers realized this was no simple tomb. It was a fortress sleeping in silence, waiting for the day its enemy came back. That day had now arrived. A desperate council formed in orbit. Commanders from each fleet met in hollow transmissions, their faces lit by the glow of fear. Some urged retreat, claiming the threat was too great, while others demanded unity, insisting the only way to survive was to stand together. But unity was fragile. The weight of old rivalries pressed heavily on them. Each side wondered if the others would turn their weapons inward the moment the greater enemy appeared. Trust was thin, and yet the shadow at the system's edge left little choice. Inside the derelict, the younger scientists worked feverishly, piecing together fragments of human language and strategy from the inscriptions. Their translations revealed grim truths. Humanity had not merely fought the enemy, they had adapted to it, sacrificing whole worlds, burning fleets of their own allies, and waging war with a ruthlessness born of desperation. The words carved into the walls were no longer just echoes of defiance. They were reminders of what survival had cost. The explorers began to question if the galaxy was ready to pay such a price. Could any modern empire endure what humanity had endured, or would they shatter at the first true test? The unknown ships broke the veil at last. They emerged from the void like giants, their hulls twisted in shapes no logic could explain, their surfaces rippling as though alive. Some were larger than cities, others small and sleek, but all radiated the same oppressive presence. They made no demands, sent no signals. They simply advanced in silence, their formation perfect, their intent undeniable. The fleets tensed, sensors screaming warnings as the alien ships locked onto them. Yet before any move could be made, the derelict acted. The ancient human ship roared to life. Its engines, dead for ages, flared with ghostly light, and its hull shuddered as power surged through it. The projections inside grew sharper, no longer fading fragments, but living images of humanity's wars. Explorers found themselves surrounded by visions of burning skies, endless battles, and human voices chanting in unison. We endure. The ship broadcast its message outward, louder than ever, carried across every channel. Every soldier, every commander, every scout in orbit heard. The words as though whispered directly into their minds. Humanity's last testament was not quiet. It was a battle cry. Panic erupted among the fleets. Some ships fired prematurely, unleashing beams of energy into the void. The enemy ships absorbed the blasts as if they were nothing, their hulls rippling in response. Then they struck. Beams of darkness lashed out, swallowing ships whole, crushing them into silence. Screams filled comms as vessels vanished one after another. The empires had faced many wars, but never an enemy like this. It was too fast, too precise, too merciless. For the first time in centuries, the mighty fleets realized they were prey. Inside the derelict, the explorers clung to the console, projecting star maps. New points of light appeared on the display, enemy movements spreading across sectors, converging on places marked by human battles. It wasn't just this system under threat. The enemy was awake everywhere. The scale of what humanity had fought became clear. This was not a war of territory or politics. It was a war for existence itself, and the galaxy was already late to the fight. Amid the chaos, a shocking discovery surfaced. One of the scientists decoded a final phrase hidden deep in the inscriptions. It spoke of a weapon, something humanity had forged in the last days of their war. It was not stored on this ship, but scattered across the galaxy, hidden within the coordinates the derelict had transmitted. The message was clear. The war was not lost, but the tools to fight it had been scattered like seeds, waiting for those brave enough to reclaim them. The explorers realized that humanity had left behind not just warnings, but a chance. A slim chance. But there was no time to act. The enemy closed in, its ships swarming with precision. Fleets scrambled to form defensive lines, their commanders, shouting orders that blurred into panic. Missiles and energy beams lit the void, but for every enemy ship destroyed, 10 more appeared, as though the darkness itself gave birth to them. The derelict trembled, as if straining against its own limits. Its ancient weapons came online, massive cannons hidden under its hull firing bolts of raw energy that tore into the enemy. For the first time, the shadows faltered. The explorers felt their hearts surge. Even after 1,000 centuries, the human ship could still fight. The fleets began to rally, inspired by the derelict's defiance. Rival empires that moments ago threatened each other now fought side by side, their ships weaving into formations, covering one another. The battle was chaos, but for the first time, there was unity. Yet even as they fought, the explorers knew it would not last. The enemy was endless, and the fleets were already breaking. Then the derelict did something no one expected. Its engines shifted, tearing open a rift in space, a doorway of light and fury. Coordinates burned into the explorers' displays, the next point in humanity's chain, another hidden relic. The message was unmistakable: follow or be left behind. But the rift was unstable, flickering with violent energy. Entering it could mean salvation or destruction. The fleets hesitated, caught between fear of the enemy and fear of the unknown. On the bridge of the derelict, the explorers argued fiercely. Some insisted they must take the risk, that humanity had left this path for a reason. Others believed it was suicide, a trap that would doom them all. But outside, the enemy ships were closing in, their beams cutting through fleet after fleet. Time was running out. The derelict's voice thundered once more, the same words etched into its walls, the same words that had carried across time. We do not die. We endure. The explorers stood torn at the edge of decision, the weight of the galaxy pressing on them. Around them, the fleets screamed in battle. The enemy's shadow darkened the stars, and the ancient ship blazed with light as though calling them forward. The rift widened, pulling at them with a force that could not be ignored. Every heartbeat brought them closer to the point where retreat would no longer be possible. And then, just as the first enemy Leviathan loomed close enough to swallow the derelict whole, the ship surged, pushing all who stood within its walls toward the rift. The choice was no longer theirs. Humanity's legacy had already chosen for them. The void trembled as the derelict prepared to leap, dragging with it the explorers, the fleets, and the secrets of 1,000 centuries of war. What waited beyond, no one knew, but they all understood. One thing: the true battle had not yet begun. The rift opened wider, swallowing the derelict in light. The explorers braced themselves as the ship tore through space, dragging fragments of nearby fleets with it. The void twisted, their senses stretched thin, and for a moment, everything was silence. Then, with a shudder, the ship emerged into another star system, one that should have been lifeless. Yet the sight that greeted them was not emptiness. Dozens of massive structures floated in orbit around a burned-out star, ancient stations of unmistakably human design. Some were shattered, others dormant, but a few glowed faintly with power, as though still alive after countless ages. The explorers stood speechless. They had expected perhaps one more relic, another derelict carrying fragments of memory. Instead, they had stumbled into an entire graveyard, or perhaps a fortress. The stations were arranged in patterns too deliberate to be chance. Defensive rings, layered barriers, a wall of steel that had once turned back an enemy tide. Humanity had not just left behind ships, they had left behind strongholds, but the awe was short-lived. Their sensors screamed warnings almost instantly. The enemy had followed. The shadows poured through the rift behind them, twisting into the system like smoke given form. For every moment of delay, more arrived. The derelict's engines strained, but the rift remained open, an open wound that bled both hope and doom. Then came the second twist, something no one expected. The stations around the dead star lit up one after another, their long slumbering, systems answering the derelict's call. Energy surged across the structures, beams of light connecting them like veins, and then a signal burst outward, strong enough to shake every ship in the system. A voice filled the air, not the distorted echo of a recording, but clear, sharp, alive. It was human. The explorers froze. The voice spoke in a language only partially understood, but the tone carried unmistakable command. It was no ancient ghost, no broken fragment of the past. This was a living mind, one that had waited through ages of silence. The realization spread like fire. Someone was still here. Humanity had not left only relics. Somewhere in this graveyard, humans had survived. The fleets orbiting the derelict erupted in chaos. Some commanders shouted to open communications, desperate to reach whoever spoke. Others argued that it was a trap, a lure designed to bait them into submission. The explorers themselves could barely breathe. Everything they thought they knew had shifted. This was no longer about studying history or preserving artifacts. This was about contact with humanity itself. But the shock deepened when the voice shifted, translating itself into alien tongues as though it had always been prepared. The words cut across every channel. "The war is not over. If you are not with us, you will not survive." The weight of those words pressed into every heart. The explorers looked at one another in disbelief. This was no plea for help. It was an ultimatum. Humanity had endured 1,000 centuries of war, and it had not softened them. Whoever remained here had not been waiting for rescue. They had been waiting for reinforcements. The enemy ships attacked without hesitation, their beams lashing toward the defensive ring. The stations responded in kind, unleashing storms of fire. Energy cannons, kinetic barrages, weapons long thought impossible, all came to life as if they had never truly slept. The battle ignited across the dead star system, a storm of destruction so vast it made the earlier fight seem small. The explorers clung to the derelict's consoles, watching in horror and awe as the conflict escalated beyond imagination. Yet, a darker truth began to emerge. The humans, or whatever remained of them, were not only fighting the enemy, they were measuring the fleets that had followed through the rift. Messages streamed through alien comms, demands for proof of loyalty, orders to fall into formation, threats of annihilation if they resisted. Humanity's survivors were not asking for allies. They were demanding obedience. This revelation shook the explorers to their core. For so long, humanity had been seen as fragile, as the underdogs who fought against impossible odds. But here, standing in the ruins of their ancient war, humanity's true nature shone through. They had not endured by kindness. They had endured by becoming harder than steel, unyielding in their survival. And now, the galaxy would face the same choice they had once faced: bend to war or be broken by it. As the stations fought, fragments of new information poured into the explorers' systems. The humans had records of the enemy, detailed logs of their strategies, their weaknesses, and their terrible resilience. Yet woven into those records were also warnings about the galaxy itself. Notes that spoke of betrayal, of alien empires that had once abandoned humanity to fight alone. The explorers realized the survivors remembered. They had not forgiven. The fleets outside fractured again under the pressure. Some pledged allegiance, desperate for protection against the enemy. Others refused, unwilling to kneel to a species they had once dismissed as insignificant. Tension rose as ships turned weapons not only on the shadows but on each other. Unity crumbled even as the enemy pressed harder. Humanity's survivors seemed to expect this, their commands growing sharper, their tone colder, as though they had anticipated disobedience. In the heart of the derelict, the explorers uncovered one last shocking twist. Hidden beneath the console, buried in encrypted human script, was a message not meant for outsiders. The younger scientists pieced it together, their faces pale as they read. It revealed that the stations were not simply defenses. They were beacons. Humanity had scattered them across the galaxy to ensure their survival. Each one was capable of awakening not only weapons, but human sleepers. Soldiers locked in stasis, waiting to rise when the war returned. And now, with the derelict's activation, those sleepers were beginning to wake. The explorers staggered under the revelation. Humanity was not gone. Humanity had never been gone. They had been waiting. And as the stations roared to life, their soldiers stirred. The galaxy was not about to inherit humanity's war. It was about to join it, whether willingly or not. The enemy pressed harder, their vast ships tearing into the defensive ring. The survivors responded with fury, their weapons unleashing devastation that lit the void like fire. The fleets caught in the middle scrambled, their captains forced to decide in seconds whether to side with humanity or be left to the enemy. Some turned their weapons on the shadows, falling into human formations. Others tried to flee, only to be cut down by fire from both sides. The system became a crucible, burning away hesitation, leaving only survival or death. The explorers felt the derelict shudder, its systems aligning with the stations. Data poured into their consoles, orders written in human script flashing faster than they could translate. It became clear that the ship they had boarded was no derelict at all. It was a key, a command vessel designed to awaken humanity's hidden armies. And now, with them inside, it was using their presence to trigger the chain. The responsibility was no longer abstract. They were part of it now. The stars outside burned with battle. The enemy pushed harder, the survivors pushed back, and the fleets of the galaxy tore themselves apart. Yet amid the fire and chaos, one truth became impossible to ignore. The war humanity had fought for 1,000 centuries was not in the past. It was only beginning again. And this time, it would not be just humanity's war. It would be the galaxy's. The explorers exchanged looks heavy with dread. They had uncovered history, yes, but they had also unleashed destiny. The shadow of humanity's survival now loomed over every world, every empire. And as the stations continued to awaken, as human soldiers began to stir after ages of silence, the galaxy trembled at what it meant. For the survivors were not asking. They were commanding. The war had returned, and humanity was calling the galaxy to its side. Those who refused would not endure. The rift still burned at the system's edge, the enemy still poured through, and the human voice thundered again across every channel. Stand or fall. The choice is yours. The battlefield burned brighter than any star. The ancient human stations poured out fire that shook space itself, unleashing storms of energy that tore into the enemy's blackened ships. The derelict, once a silent relic, fought as if alive, its cannons thundering in rhythm with the pulse of its heart. The fleets of the galaxy scrambled around it, some holding formation beside the humans' weapons, others breaking apart under the crushing weight of fear. Every second carried the weight of history, every moment an echo of the 1,000 centuries of war humanity had endured before. The explorers clung to the derelict's command chamber, watching the battle unfold on shifting projections. The enemy surged endlessly, their ships reforming even after being torn apart, their beams slicing through defenses with merciless precision. Yet the stations held. They were built for this war, for this enemy, and though time had scarred them, their fury was intact. Still, it was clear the tide was too vast. For every enemy destroyed, a dozen more slipped through the rift. The explorers knew the humans who survived were right. The galaxy could not simply fight, it had to change or be consumed. Then the human voice thundered again across the comms. It was clearer now, urgent, commanding. Activate the beacon. The explorers felt the derelict's systems surge beneath their hands, dragging them into action. Symbols flashed in front of them, human commands that their translators struggled to parse. It became clear what was being asked. The derelict was more than a key to awaken stations. It was tied to something deeper, a network that stretched across the galaxy. To activate it meant unleashing the full measure of what humanity had hidden. The explorers hesitated. To follow meant binding themselves to humanity's war forever. To refuse meant certain death. The fleets outside faced the same choice. Some captains, shaken by the enemy's unending assault, swore allegiance to the survivors, falling into human formations and lending their fire to the defense. Others resisted, unwilling to kneel, and were obliterated by the combined wrath of both humanity's stations and the enemy. The battlefield became a crucible, boiling away politics and pride until only survival remained. Slowly, painfully, more ships turned. To humanity's side, not from loyalty but necessity. They saw the truth that had carried humans across the ages. There was no compromise with this enemy, only endurance or extinction. The explorers made their decision. With trembling hands, they triggered the command. The derelict roared as if exhaling after an eternity of silence. Energy burst outward, a wave that raced across the system, through the rift, across the galaxy. Everywhere hidden stations flickered awake, their signals joining in chorus. Across countless forgotten worlds, stasis pods hissed open, and human soldiers rose, their eyes burning with purpose after centuries of sleep. Humanity was no longer a whisper in history. It was a storm returning to the present. The tide shifted. With every awakened station, new weapons came online. Beams of impossible precision lanced through the enemy. Swarms of drones forged in humanity's ancient foundries, launched in coordinated strikes. Human soldiers, still weak from slumber, took command of defenses with grim resolve. For the first time, the enemy faltered. The galaxy's fleets, rallied by the impossible sight of humanity's return, fought harder, their fear turning into determination. The cry of "We endure" rang across channels, no longer just human, but echoed by alien voices as well. Yet the climax was not victory alone. As the enemy's great leviathans pressed in closer, one final truth revealed itself. The rift was not natural. It was being held open deliberately, not by the enemy, but by the stations themselves. The explorers' screens filled with warnings. The humans had designed the rift as a trap, a final weapon. If the stations poured their energy into it, the rift could collapse, crushing everything caught within it, including the enemy's endless reinforcements. but the cost would be catastrophic. The stations themselves would be destroyed, the last remnants of humanity's fortress consumed in the collapse. The survivor's voice cut across the comms once more, cold and steady. "This is the price. Choose." The fleets wavered. To sacrifice. The stations meant losing the greatest weapons the galaxy had ever seen. But to refuse meant the enemy would never stop coming. The explorers felt the weight of the decision bearing down on them. Humanity had faced it before, again and again, and each time they had chosen to endure, no matter the cost. Now that choice had fallen to the galaxy itself. At last, the command was given. Energy surged through the network. The stations blazed with light so intense it burned across the void, brighter than the dead star they circled. The rift began to collapse, folding in on itself with a roar of power that shook every ship. The enemy ships screamed in silence, their forms twisting as the rift devoured them. One by one, the great leviathans were torn apart, their endless reinforcements cut off forever. The battlefield became a furnace, swallowing shadows and light alike. When the blinding fury faded, silence returned. The rift was gone. The enemy's fleet was broken, their presence shattered. The galaxy's survivors floated in stunned quiet, staring at the ruins of the human stations. What had once been humanity's greatest fortress was now only wreckage, sacrificed to seal the wound. For a brief moment, there was peace, but it was fragile, uncertain. The war was not ended. It was only delayed. The explorers slumped in the derelict's command chamber, their hearts heavy. They had witnessed the impossible, humanity's return, the fall of the enemy, the sacrifice that saved them all. Yet just as relief began to settle, the final twist struck. The derelict stirred again, its lights burning brighter than before. The human voice returned, softer this time, almost mournful. "This was only one front. The others remain. You have seen what it costs to endure. Now the war is yours." New coordinates flashed across the consoles, thousands of them, scattered across the galaxy. Each point marked another battlefield, another enemy stronghold, another legacy of humanity's endless fight. The explorers realized with dread that this battle had not been the climax of the war, but only the opening act. The humans who had awakened were not enough to fight on every front. The galaxy itself had been drafted into the war that had defined humanity for 1,000 centuries. The fleets looked upon the derelict with fear and awe. They understood now that humanity had not returned as saviors. They had returned as commanders of a war that would consume every world. The choice was gone. The galaxy had already been bound to humanity's path, bound by survival, bound by the truth that had carried humans through endless time. There was no peace, only the will to endure. As the derelict's engines flared once more, preparing to lead the way, the explorers exchanged hollow stares. The greatest conflict in history had not ended. It had only begun anew. And somewhere, in the darkness between stars, the enemy still waited, unbroken, endless, ready to rise again. The galaxy would never be the same. And as the signal spread across every corner of space, one thing became certain: the War of 1,000 centuries was no longer just humanity's, it was everyone's. The battlefield that had once burned brighter than a sun was now quiet. Fragments of shattered ships drifted slowly, their twisted hulls catching the dim light of the dead star. The rift was gone, collapsed under the sacrifice of the human stations, and with it, the endless stream of enemy reinforcements. For the first time since the discovery of the ancient derelict, silence returned to the galaxy. Yet it was not the silence of peace, but the silence that follows a storm, heavy, uncertain, waiting for what comes next. The explorers remained aboard the derelict, their bodies exhausted and their minds reeling. They had uncovered secrets older than any history book, walked through the scars of 1,000 centuries of war, and seen humanity rise from the shadows of legend into the blinding light of reality. Questions still clung to them, but the answers were both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Humanity had never disappeared. They had never surrendered. They had only hidden, endured, and waited for the moment when the galaxy itself would be forced to share their burden. That moment had now arrived. Outside, the surviving fleets gathered in broken formations. Ships once painted with the colors of rival empires now floated side by side, their crews staring at the derelict that had led them here. They all knew the truth. None of their empires would have survived the battle without humanity's hidden weapons and their sacrifice. The old rivalries that had kept them divided looked small in comparison to the scale of the threat they had faced. Some captains already whispered of alliances, of building something new from the ashes. Others spoke with fear, wondering if they had traded one enemy for another. Humanity's return was not just salvation. It was a reminder that the galaxy would never again belong to those who had dismissed humans as weak. The explorers turned, their attention back to the console. The coordinates the derelict had revealed stretched across the galaxy like a chain of fire. Each point marked another hidden battlefield, another remnant of humanity's endless fight. Some would hold weapons, others soldiers still waiting to wake, and still more would mark the scars of enemy strongholds. The war was not ended by the collapse of the rift. It had only been delayed. Humanity had trusted the galaxy with its legacy, but it was clear they expected more than gratitude. They expected commitment. Among the explorers, arguments flared again. Some believed the galaxy should unite under humanity's command, following their strategies to ensure survival. Others feared what that would mean, losing their freedom, their cultures, their right to decide their own fate. Yet all of them understood the same truth. There was no going back to the way things were. The war had changed everything. Every world, every empire, every species had been pulled into the current of history, and there was no stepping out. A final transmission came from the human survivors who had revealed themselves during the battle. Their faces, pale and lined with the weight of centuries, appeared across every surviving ship's screens. "We gave you time," the human commander said, his voice steady but cold. "We fought so you could grow, so you could rise. Now the time has ended. The war is upon us again. If you would live, stand with us. If you would fall, know it will be by your own choice." The transmission ended, leaving no room for negotiation. Humanity had spoken, and the galaxy had heard. The explorers sat in silence after the message faded. They felt the weight of it pressing on their hearts. Humanity was not asking for allies. They were demanding them. And yet, beneath the steel and fire of the words, the explorers sensed something else, a grim kind of hope. Humanity believed the galaxy could endure as they had. That belief, more than their weapons or their fortresses, was the true legacy left behind. In the weeks that followed, the surviving fleets limped back to their homes, carrying stories of what had happened. Entire populations listened in disbelief as they heard that humanity was real, alive, and more formidable than any had imagined. Empires shook, governments faltered, and new alliances began to form. Old enemies sent envoys to one another, not out of kindness, but out of necessity. The galaxy was beginning to change, bound together by the knowledge that the shadows in the void would return, and only unity could resist them. The explorers, forever marked by what they had witnessed, chose not to return to their separate homes. Instead, they remained aboard the derelict, now seen as a living relic and symbol. They dedicated themselves to piecing together the rest of the human records, to translating strategies and warnings that could save worlds in battles yet to come. They carried the burden of truth, not just as scholars, but as messengers. The derelict had chosen them, and in their hearts they knew their duty was not finished. Across the galaxy, whispers began to grow. Some spoke of humanity as saviors, the ones who had carried fire through the darkness. Others spoke of them as tyrants, beings too hardened by endless war to ever allow peace. Yet whether seen as heroes or as threats, none could deny their importance. The phrase etched into the walls of the derelict spread across the stars, painted on banners, carved into monuments, whispered by soldiers and civilians alike. We do not die, we endure. The unexpected twist came not from the enemy, but from the humans themselves. Months after the battle, another signal emerged, stronger than the first, carrying across every known channel. It was not a threat, nor a demand. It was a warning. The humans revealed that the enemy they had fought was not a single species or empire, but something greater, a force woven into the fabric of the universe, feeding on fear, division, and weakness. The battles the galaxy had faced were only fragments of a war far larger than anyone had imagined. Humanity had endured not because they were stronger, but because they had been willing to pay any price. Now they were asking if the galaxy was willing to do the same. The explorers felt their hearts tighten as they listened. The war would not be won with weapons alone. It would be won with unity, sacrifice, and the unbreakable will to survive. That was the truth humanity had left behind. That was the fire they had carried through 1,000 centuries. And now that fire was spreading. The story of the ancient derelict ended with a galaxy changed forever. What began as a whisper in the void had become a storm that no empire could escape. Humanity's shadow stretched across the stars once more, not as conquerors, but as survivors who demanded others rise with them. The explorers stood at the edge of this new age, knowing they had seen the turning of history. The war was not over, but the choice was clear. The galaxy could endure if it chose to. As the derelict drifted through space, its hull scarred yet alive with light, the explorers looked out at the stars. They no longer saw them as cold or distant. They saw them as battlefields waiting to be claimed, as beacons of hope waiting to be lit. And in the silence, they whispered the words that had carried humanity through the ages, words that now belonged to the galaxy itself. We do not die. We endure.